Woodhouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'd be very keen to talk about the budget initiatives as they relate to my portfolios of Immigration, Veterans Affairs and Associate Transport. But before I do, it's interesting to reflect in the 3 weeks past since the budget was read on the reactions by some, and in particular our friends on the other side. Mr Parker was, yes, of course, well, our friendlies then. I like to be friendly. Labor believes, according to Mr Parker, Labor believes the government should return to surplus, and indeed we would have in 2014-15. That was under a headline, among others, that Audrey Young had, which was the one thing Alternative Finance Minister David Parker won't be criticising is the government's confirmation that it's on track to surplus in 2014-15. And I contrast that with the comments that Mr Parker was making only a year ago in Budget 2012, when he said that the government's path to surplus in 14-15, when it was first announced, was not only barely achievable, but that the government was placing an overemphasis on a return to surplus ahead of the other priorities.
Not credible.
So how he can say that then and then turn around a year later and say, well, of course they're going to be back in surplus in 14-15, and so would we have.
What a joke.
So would we have. Well, here's what I don't understand, and Labor can explain it for me if they can, how they can reconcile, in light of the legacy of 10 years of deficits and the very difficult decisions that this government has had to take, decisions that they would not have the wherewithal or the attitude to make, and then add on top of that all the unfunded spending promises that we've had since the 2011 election. And I don't have time to go through all of them. But Sue Moroney's extra paid parental leave, Claire Curran wanting to resurrect TVNZ and subsidise $160 million for wagons to be made in New Zealand. I think Mr Little's just mentioned reversing the legal aid changes. In-work tax credit. I'm not quite sure where Labor is on the in-work tax credit. I think they campaigned on it, then they went quiet on it. Who knows where that'll be if they have to coalesce with the Greens. Removing the changes to student loans and allowances, the list goes on. So here's what I don't understand. If returning to surplus is so easy, how does the Labor Party reconcile the fact that they weren't prepared to make any of the hard decisions that the government's had to make, opposed every single one of them in every single budget and every single bill, add a whole pile, billions, 100,000 houses they were going to build, remember? Who knows how that's going to be paid for? The mixed ownership model wouldn't exist. And so all of those really good things we're going to fund out of the Future Investment Fund, 21st century schools. What happens to 21st century schools? Either we go deeper into debt for them, or we don't get 21st century schools. No idea what that choice is going to be, but that's right. Tax and spend, borrow and hope. One thing we can rely on Labor is that they don't change. Tax and spend, borrow and hope. And that's before we even get to the Greens, who they would need to rely on in confidence of supply. The single electricity market. Well, Parker's comments were very interesting on the single electricity market. He told Cabinet, actually, when he was near it, that a single buyer would result in higher capital and operating costs. It would be risky, uncertain, would put investment proposals on hold and be poor at sustaining cost pressure on operating costs.
Who said that?
And when Mr Parker said that, that's a very good question. But when challenged on the inconsistency of the announcement in April against his publicly made statements as Minister for Energy and Resources in 2006, he said this: well, things have changed. Well, I know what's changed, Mr Speaker. David Parker is no longer Minister, Labor is no longer government, talk is cheap. Following that up with action is much, much harder. So it's great to be a lion in opposition. We'll see what happens when push comes to shove. Now, Mr Speaker, I am the Minister of Immigration. It's been my great privilege to hold that portfolio over the last 5 months, having taken over in very good shape, I have to say, from the Honourable Nathan Guy during the last reshuffle, in much, much better shape than we found Immigration New Zealand in 2008 when we took office. And if there is a better example of a department in disarray under a government asleep at the wheel in 2008, I can't think of one. Pacific Division in complete disarray, inconsistent decision-making against the rules that had been put in place, slow, lacking in timeliness, and I've been very, very impressed with the staff and their effort to turn around that organisation in very difficult circumstances. And the performance improvement measures in the budget are plain to see. Customer satisfaction with the overall quality of the service of Immigration New Zealand has gone up from 73% in 2010 to 85% in March, and it's still climbing. The quality of the decision-making, the accuracy of the decision-making in just 2 years has gone from 77% to 96%. That's just about as good as you get. And of course, the funding lines, as for many of the departments in this budget, are flat and slightly dropping. We have asked our public servants to do more with the same, perhaps a drop in real terms. That is a challenge, but one thing that Immigration New Zealand is meeting that challenge is through changing business process, changing technologies, changing branch structures, away from a traditional branch structure that is perhaps less nimble in responding to changes in demand for visa applications, to an online service through the global management system that will be coming online near the end of the year, a very large IT project which will revolutionise the way people interact with Immigration New Zealand, and changes to visa acceptance centres and a much more nimble framework within which to be able to make those decisions. We want our immigration staff to do three things: be fair, be consistent and be timely. And I've been very, very impressed with their attitude towards that change. And I'm very confident that with the online visa processing, which is of course a better public service target that Chris Tremaine as Minister of Internal Affairs has, to have 70% of transactions with government online by 2017, immigration's target is 80%, and I'm confident that by 2017 we'll be able to achieve that target and help Mr Tremaine look as good as I know he is in that portfolio, Mr Speaker. So I wish the immigration staff and team all the best in that endeavour. Veterans Affairs is also a considerable privilege to hold a portfolio where the government has provided, I think, very strong benefits to our war heroes, our veterans, and it's interesting to reflect on the fact that in the last 10 years, after a diminishing number of veterans, and it is true that our World War II veterans are reducing in number as they get older, but we have been in a number of recognised emergencies over the last 10 years, not the least of which is Afghanistan, East Timor, the Solomon Islands and so on. And so we are creating a new raft of veterans who have served with distinction in those theatres. And as a consequence, the War Pensions Act, which is now 58 years old, is probably not as fit for purpose as it needs to be. The Cabinet has approved the changes that will be made, and I'm looking forward to introducing legislation into the House later this year to give effect to those changes and to make sure that we continue to serve our veteran communities in the way that we have in the past. And of course, we are coming up to a significant period of commemoration as from next year we recognise two significant milestones: the 70th anniversary of two important World War II theatres, Casino, which of course New Zealand forces served with distinction, and D-Day. But of course 2014 marks the centenary of the start of World War I, and as Minister in Veterans Affairs New Zealand is responsible for the commemorations that will be taking place at Gallipoli in 2015, and I'm pleased to report that progress is well underway on that. Good. I just want to finish by touching on some of my responsibilities as Associate Transport Minister, and in particular the Delegation for Road Safety. And I want to take the opportunity to congratulate the people of New Zealand and the police who patrol our roads for the fantastic outcome last Queen's Birthday weekend last week. For the first time since records began, no one died on our roads this Queen's Birthday weekend. And that was despite the fact that the weather was very challenging. We had high winds in the South Island, torrential rain in the north, and yet we were still able to achieve a zero death toll. It continues a trend that started probably 4.5 years ago, I think would be fair to say, that death and injury on our roads was reducing. The government is committed to the Safer Journeys Action Plan. There is a new 2-year plan underway. The low-hanging fruit, I think, has been picked. And it's a little harder now, and it will probably take longer to change some of the behaviours, the engineering, and increase the safety of the vehicles on our road. But I'm very confident that we continue that excellent work that has begun, and I look forward to probably a road toll that might be a record this year. I don't want to tempt fate by suggesting that we could get there. But all of those things, I think, are part of a budget that's solid, it's sound, it's been well received by the IMF, the World Bank, the OECD and many other commentators, and I commend it.
Good speech.
Julianne Genter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.